Good morning, Dan and Amy, and a good piece in National Review from our friend Andy McCarthy. The New York Times struggling to save its collusion tale as the real scandal that's emerging centers around the much talked about Steele dossier, the Clinton campaign opposition research compendium on Trump that seemingly was used by the FBI to gain FISA warrants and unfurl this investigation that has transpired over the last,
6 months now?
well, it's more than that. It's more like 18 months.
18 months, yeah.
Just trying to get a handle on where we stand as all this talk of impeachment continues to be bandied about, particularly with Democrats' high hopes of taking back the House in 2018. And obviously, since they've invested so much political capital on the Russian meddling in the election, Russian collusion story, if they were to move in that direction, this would have to be, wouldn't you think, a part of their case in chief against the President of the United States. Well, what kind of case do they have as we sit here at the end of Trump's first year? For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor in New York, chief assistant U.S. attorney there, now contributing editor to National Review. Andy, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, Happy New Year. How are you?
Happy New Year. The dossier story that won't go away, and is that where our focus should be, on forcing the FBI to answer more questions as compared to concerns about Trump and Trump associates answering so many questions?
Well, Dan, at this point, the dossier story won't go away because it's being looked into by people who are investigating now the dossier, which I find to be very interesting. It seems to me like the left is beating about as hasty a retreat from it as they can, when they start moving away from it with the rapidity they are after, as you and Amy just pointed out, this investigation actually goes back closer to 18 months. People forget that when Mueller was appointed in May, he wasn't given a new investigation. He was given an investigation that the FBI had been working since about May of the year before. So he's been at it for 7 months. The Bureau was at it for about a year at least before then. They've been at this for a long time, and it was they who made the dossier into a huge deal. They leaked it. They put the details of it out into the media. The people who generated it, GPS Fusion, we know now that they peddled the information to people in the media. They wrote op-eds, as Michael Isikoff did, at around the time that the FBI was looking to get, and the Justice Department under Obama were looking to get FISA surveillance coverage on Carter Page. They were leaking details of what he supposedly did in Russia, which are details that are in the dossier. I mention all this because the Fusion GPS people a day or two ago have an op-ed in the New York Times defending themselves. And when I read it, what I was blown away by was the fact that it is completely devoid of any discussion of the specific allegations in the dossier. And it's not like you and me and the Wall Street Journal and the House Intelligence Committee made up the dossier. The dossier came from these people, and they peddled it as hard as they could peddle it until it collapsed.
Well, I've read so many articles about, the Democrats celebrating the fact that George Papadopoulos, who's from Chicago, 28 years old, got drunk and was bragging that, he had dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russians, and that's what started the whole Russian investigation, not the dossier.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting about that, Amy? The Aussies thought that what Papadopoulos told them was so important that they didn't tell anybody about it for months afterwards. And then I guess the story now is that when the emails started to be published after they got the Democratic National Committee emails, when they got to WikiLeaks, when they started to be published, supposedly the Aussies put two and two together and tipped off the Americans that they had this drunken conversation, Papadopoulos and this Australian diplomat in London a few months before. But what they were talking about in the way of emails, according to at least what Papadopoulos says in the statement of facts that Mueller put out when Papadopoulos pled guilty back in October, or when his plea was announced in October, the emails they're talking about are not the same. I still think that what was being dangled to Papadopoulos by his supposed Russian sources, I think, were the 30,000 emails that Mrs. Clinton had on her server that she didn't turn over to the State Department, which there was always a lot of chit-chat about whether the Russians or some other intelligence service, had gotten those. And what actually got leaked was not those, of course. What got leaked were the emails of the Democrat National Committee and Podesta. So I'm not even sure they're talking about the same emails. But I think what's telling here is it was Carter Page that the FBI and the Justice Department got a foreign intelligence surveillance warrant on. It wasn't Papadopoulos. They didn't even talk to Papadopoulos, evidently, until sometime in 2017. So they obviously, even tipped off by the Aussies, weren't too blown away by the information. And the other thing I think, Amy, that we have to bear in mind is we have gotten a torrent of leaks for the last year plus. And the name George Papadopoulos never, ever came out until after he pled guilty in October. Nobody ever heard of him. So the thought that after they leaked everything they had, that suddenly we're going to learn that this guy was the guy who triggered the whole investigation when we never heard his name before. And when you look at his guilty plea, if you look at that 14-page statement of facts, page after page after page of collusion information. They're setting up meetings. They're going to meet with Putin. Putin's going to meet with Trump. Their subordinates are going to meet together. Maybe they're going to get all these emails about Hillary Clinton, et cetera, et cetera. Collusion on every page. What does Mueller plead him guilty to? One count of lying to the FBI, not even about something important, about the timing of one of his conversations with this Maltese academic that was supposedly connected to Russia. So, I'm please, George Papadopoulos.
Well, exactly. And look, the New York Times story, here we go again. And to your point in your piece, Andy, in National Review, the New York Times struggling to save its collusion tail. New York Times struggling to run interference on the dossier matter, too, with this and then anonymous sources, one of those things. It doesn't make it untrue, the allegations against Papadopoulos, and that's how this whole thing got started. But it also doesn't exactly inspire a lot of confidence given the source. Given the source that we also found out a couple of days ago from WikiLeaks, Washington Times, New York Times, big difference. New York Times reporter Scott Shane, national security reporter for the New York Times, leaking information, leaking stories in advance of their publication in the New York Times to the State Department to basically tip off the Clinton regime. This was when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. The recipient of the email, Philip Crowley, was the United States Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs under Hillary Clinton's State Department. So they're getting advanced copies of New York Times stories that may be sensitive to the State Department, so the State Department can game plan a response or use misdirection play to diminish a story. I mean, so you want to talk about collusion. The collusion seems to be occurring everywhere within the kind of big government, big media, and to some extent, intelligence and law enforcement communities inside the Beltway. The only place that doesn't seem to be any evidence that you can wrap your arms around is between Trump and the Russians.
Yeah, well, look, I don't. There could be connections between Trump and Russia because let's bear in mind that up until November 8th, 2016. What the Obama administration was telling us was that Russia was a regular country. They were laughing at Mitt Romney when he said that they were America's biggest geopolitical foe. The whole idea was that if we treat them like a normal country and have normal relations with them, everything was going to be fine. So a lot of people had ties with Russia. And there's no doubt that Trump did too. The question has been, and this is the reason, Dan, that I've been hammering or trying to hammer home for months now, the point that collusion, which is what the label that they've decided to put on this, is not in and of itself a crime.
Right.
Having coordinated activity or concerted activity between two people can be, or two entities, can be criminal or can be completely innocent. And what I tried to stress to people is the issue here isn't collusion; it's conspiracy. Do they have evidence that whatever ties he had with Russia, Trump agreed with the Kremlin to be involved in something that was in violation of American law, like hacking email accounts, so that there could be some impact on the election? And that's the real question. And the reason that question hasn't been pressed, I think, in that way, is that they're completely without that kind of evidence.
Yeah, but in addition to that, it seems to me that the FBI is also, and Mueller correspondingly, is also blithely uninterested in conspiracy to violate the law when it comes to Hillary Clinton's emails and the handling of classified information and everything that's been revealed in Hillary Clinton's inner circle, including even to some extent what Trump was tweeting about yesterday with respect to Uma Abedin.
Yeah, well, let me say two things about that. Number one, that's not in Mueller's bailiwick. And I don't want it to be, because I think these special counsel investigations are terrible. It's an awful institution. We shouldn't have it unless there's an absolute need for it. Like, there's such a conflict of interest that the Justice Department itself can't investigate. And secondly, with respect to Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin and all these transmissions of classified information that should have been prosecuted and weren't, that's why we have a Justice Department. And right now, the Justice Department is being run by people who have been put in place by President Trump. So I frankly don't understand and haven't understood from the beginning, number one, why don't Trump's appointees at the FBI and the Justice Department cooperate with the congressional investigations about the dossier and the other information that went on during the campaign? And secondly, why don't they revisit these classified information violations?
Are they going to,
There's
though?
no reason. That's what we have a Justice Department.
Well, I agree with that, and I think Trump's whole statement in the New York Times interview about it, I can do whatever I want. The Justice Department was intended to be kind of a shot across the bow with respect to what you're saying. But as long as we have this,
he shouldn't be doing shots across the bow on Twitter. He should bring the Attorney General and the FBI Director into the Oval Office and tell them to cooperate with Congress and do their job.
Well, I agree with that, but of course you've got political consiglieres that are telling the president, I think, and maybe he's even considering it too. I don't know his mind, but say the optics of this: don't talk to anybody over there. Don't bring in the FBI, because they're going to say obstruction of justice. They're going to say you're interfering, and even though you're right on the substance, it's under the executive. You can of course bring them in to say do your job. The idea is take a hands off, just stay 1,000 miles away from it. There's nothing here, so just let them hopefully come to their exhaustive end at some point in the not too distant future.
All right. Well, then don't call them the deep state on Twitter either.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fair point. Yeah. Okay.
So when do you think this Russian investigation is going to end, and what's next?
Well, I've thought for a long time, Amy, that Mueller's. I'm not saying he wants to impeach Trump, but I think what they've been looking at is whether there's grounds to impeach him or not. I don't know how Mueller's mind on this, but whether there could possibly be an impeachment or not of Trump depends on how the midterm elections come out. I think if the Democrats get the House back, they're going to try to impeach Trump. So I think this investigation is going to go at least beyond next November, probably next January.
If that happened, and I mean, boy, that I think that would make 1998 pale in comparison, because it seems to me that the credibility of the FBI in particular is in the crosshairs here as well, in a way that it certainly wasn't during the Clinton impeachment proceeding. Could the FBI recover in the minds of at least half of the nation if it were to proceed?
Well, it wouldn't be the FBI, it would be the Democrats. And I actually think that if the impeachment is on the table as a big issue in the midterm elections, and it may be because their base is crazy enough that they are pushing them in that direction, even though there doesn't seem to be any evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors, that the country is going to be revolted by that. And even people who are not friendly toward Trump, of which there are many, are going to say this is like way overboard. And I think, what will happen is the Democrats will overplay their hand, which they usually do, and they probably won't win the midterm elections, even though it looks very good for them right now. But, if there's something out there that's worthy of an impeachment inquiry and it comes out, then all bets are off. But if it's what we have now, and they're pushing for impeachment, and they're pushing for this investigation to be sustained, then I think that they're going to feel it at the ballot box. And the smarter Democrats probably are aware of that.
Over the holiday, there was also a story about Paul Manafort and the possibility that Mueller may file a superseding indictment.
Right.
The indication was it would potentially be tax charges. So, again, it wouldn't be anything related to any illegal collusion, conspiracy, which, of course, is central to the conversation. Is that your read on Manafort, that Manafort still doesn't have any utility, at least in terms of what the Democrats are looking for, or Mueller's team is looking for?
Yeah, well, I think we probably talked about this when the original indictment came out. I think if you read the Manafort indictment, it is suggestive of other tax and fraud charges that weren't brought. And what I speculated at the time, and it's sheer speculation because I don't have any information about this, but tax charges under statute and in Justice Department regulations have to be approved by tax division in Main Justice, and they're usually slow. And plus, here you have the complication of, Mueller is supposed to be quasi-independent from the Justice Department, so is he under that same regimen of rules? I think he has to be, because I think it's statutory that tax division has to approve, and they're slow. So in my experience as a prosecutor, very often you were waiting for tax division for a long time to approve tax charges, even when your other charges were ready to go. And I suspect that's probably more of what's going on with Manafort than anything else.
All right. He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review. His recent piece, The New York Times Struggles to Save Its Collusion Tale, you can find at nationalreview.com. Andy, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a great day, guys.
You too.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen.